Hi, welcome to SBR Videos. I'm Peter Loshak. We are previewing the 2015 NHL playoffs right now with Joe Duffy from OffshoreInsiders.com. If you recall, Joe Duffy last year covered the NHL playoffs with us and just killed it. Just had an awesome read on the series prices and also particularly impressed me with his game-by-game adjustments within the series. And Joe Duffy, obviously been doing this for a long time at OffshoreInsiders.com, knows what he's talking about. We're going to start with Calgary, Vancouver. Joe Duffy, thanks for being back with us.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
All right, Joe Duffy, you've chosen a pretty tough series right now for our first one, Calgary, Vancouver, right? Vancouver has home ice advantage. They are a modest favorite of minus 142 to win the series at Pinnacle right now. Calgary's plus 126 on the other side. And the interesting thing about this series is that Calgary, every year we see one of these playoff teams in the NHL that based on, on ice shot metrics, either shouldn't be in the playoffs or based on those metrics got extremely lucky. And this year, that's Calgary. They're bottom five in the NHL this year by most of those advanced shot metrics, Corsi, Fenwick, all that stuff. The question is, how much does that matter here? Vancouver, obviously an excellent team. They've got great depth in goal. And Calgary, maybe they got lucky, or maybe they're just a team that's very disciplined and well coached, and that is likely to carry over into the playoffs. Which side here has value? I don't know. These lines look pretty dead on to me. If Calgary was maybe a little bit more of an underdog, I'd consider taking them. But at those odds, with not having home ice advantage, I think I'd have to go with Vancouver at minus 142. What's your take on the series, Joe Duffy?
I'm actually going to make a little bit of an if-then type proposition. I do like Vancouver in this series, but I wouldn't be surprised if Calgary wins Game 1, or at the very least does split there, especially with Ryan Miller going to be probably rusty for Vancouver. Whether or not the Canucks truly have depth, I'm not all that sure. That his replacement, Eddie Lack, kind of lacked consistency. So I do think it's quite possible that Calgary could get off to a quick start in this series, and that Vancouver, you could get a much more value on them if you bet after Game 1 or especially after Game 2, because I think they're going to get at least a split. But I do think Vancouver will get stronger as the series goes on. Obviously, Miller will be back to being, a little sharper when he gets another game or two under his belt. And with a deeper team, usually that does pay off deeper in the series. So I do like Vancouver, but I'm not sure I would bet it before the series starts.
Right.
I would actually hold out for a better price after Calgary possibly takes a 1-0 series lead, or at least ties it at 1 each.
Yeah, this series does feel like it has 7 games written all over it. So maybe the best way to go would be just to bet the series at 7 games. But then again, if it does go 7 games, is Calgary really a good bet to steal that 7th game on the road?
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily going to go 7 games. I do think that Vancouver probably should get stronger as the series goes on, but yeah, there's not really, neither one of these teams, or clearly I wouldn't say that Vancouver has a huge advantage over them. So it could go 6 or 7, and that's a thing with Hiller. He's been pretty inconsistent in the playoffs, but I actually like inconsistent players, because what I like to say, when you least expect it, expect it. So he might actually be pretty good as a live underdog, and that's where you got to look at it differently from a betting standpoint than if you're just a general fan. If we were, on CBC or on ESPN previewing this and not really taking into consideration the odds, but you might have a little bit of a live underdog here, especially in some of the games, especially, they might look terrible one game, and then that's when they're going to bounce back with a win.
All right, let me make this point to you, though. Vancouver, down the stretch of the regular season, had an awesome power play. That was really their strength, and I guess they're going to be counting on that to carry over into the playoffs. But Calgary was a very disciplined team. They didn't give up. They were one of the best teams in the NHL in terms of not giving up penalties. And then, as we know, in the playoffs, fewer penalties tend to be called anyway. So that might be a strength of Vancouver that we saw with them down the stretch that might be very minimized in this series. What do you think about that?
And Calgary, we're going to see how they do without Mark Giordano. They actually did pretty well down the stretch, but in the playoffs it's a little bit differently. But yeah, a lot of cliches are false, but one that is definitely true in the NHL playoffs is about the importance of special teams, simply because teams play with a lot more intensity, and therefore it is tougher to get goals, and getting those goals on the power play, that's one of those widely circulated cliches that I do agree with. It does come down to the power plays, and that's something to keep an eye on. But yeah, Calgary, without their best defenseman, Boy, that's going to really hurt them in the playoffs.
All right, so then you would give, for the power plays, an advantage to Vancouver because they were so strong down the stretch, despite the fact that Calgary was a team that didn't give up penalties in the regular season as much as, they were better than average team at not giving up penalties.
And the last line in the power play is always the goalie, Ryan Miller. We've seen him come up big in both the playoffs and in the Canada Cup or the World Cup or whatever they call that international competition. They keep changing the name, the World Cup. I guess it's been called. Well, we've seen him come up big in big games, but the question is, how healthy or how sharp is he going to be? But yeah, probably a slight edge, I think, for Vancouver.
Very interesting thoughts, Joe Duffy from OffshoreInsiders.com, as usual. But as of right now, this doesn't have to be any kind of official pick or anything, but you're lean. If you had to bet the series price right now, Calgary plus 126 or Vancouver minus 142, what would you take?
Vancouver, but I'm actually going to wait until Calgary probably picks up one of the first two games and you get a little bit better odds.
I'd have to agree with you, Joe Duffy. Vancouver minus 142 would be my pick as well. Thanks so much, Joe. And give another quick plug for OffshoreInsiders.com. Tell us what your site's all about.
Not just the NHL playoffs, but Major League Baseball underdogs, and of course the NBA playoffs just around the corner. We get it all. OffshoreInsiders.com, Joe Duffy's picks.